The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle, as Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat quietly in her favorite garden spot. She held a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her mind wandering to memories that seemed both distant and vivid. The doctors had been clear about her condition, and though she had fought bravely through months of treatment, she knew her time was becoming precious. William found her there, as he often did these days. He approached slowly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful moment, but she sensed his presence immediately. After nearly 2 decades together, they had developed an almost telepathic connection. She turned to him with that gentle smile that had first captured his heart at university, though it carried a weight now that it hadn't before. "The children are asking about the weekend plans," William said softly, settling beside her on the wooden bench they had placed there years ago. It was weathered now, like so many things in their life together, but it remained sturdy and comforting. Catherine nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I've been thinking about that. Maybe we should take them to Anmer Hall. Just the 5 of us. No staff, no schedules, no official duties." Her voice carried a wistfulness that made William's chest tighten. They had always tried to give their children normal experiences, despite their extraordinary circumstances. George, Charlotte, and Louis had grown up understanding their roles, but also knowing the warmth of family dinners, bedtime stories, and silly games in the garden. Now, more than ever, Catherine wanted to create memories that would last long after she was gone. William reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become second nature over the years. "That sounds perfect. George has been asking if he can try cooking again. Remember the last time?" They both smiled at the memory of their eldest son's ambitious attempt at making pancakes, which had resulted in more batter on the ceiling than in the pan. "Charlotte wants to paint the sunset," Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger with each word about their children. "She's been carrying that little easel everywhere. And Louis," she paused, thinking of their youngest, "he just wants to build the biggest fort in the world using every cushion in the house." The conversation was deliberately light, but underneath lay the weight of unspoken understanding. They both knew these simple family moments were becoming more precious with each passing day. Catherine's illness had progressed despite the best medical care available, and while they had chosen to keep the details private, the reality was becoming harder to ignore. As they sat together in the garden, Catherine's mind drifted to a conversation she'd had with her mother the week before. Carol Middleton had visited, bringing homemade biscuits and that practical wisdom that had guided Catherine through so many challenges over the years. They had talked about legacy, about the children, about how to say goodbye to a life that had been so much more than either of them had ever imagined. "I want them to remember laughter," Catherine had told her mother. "Not the sadness, not the illness, but the joy we shared. The way William makes silly voices when he reads bedtime stories. The way George gets so serious when he's concentrating on a puzzle. Charlotte's terrible jokes that make us all groan and laugh at the same time. Louis's endless energy and his way of finding wonder in everything." Her mother had nodded, tears in her eyes but understanding in her heart. "They will, darling. Children remember love more than anything else, and your home is full of love." Now, sitting beside William in their garden sanctuary, Catherine felt the truth of those words. Despite the challenges they faced as members of the royal family, despite the constant scrutiny and the weight of duty, they had built something beautiful together. Their marriage had weathered storms and celebrations, public triumphs and private struggles, always emerging stronger. William squeezed her hand gently, bringing her back to the present moment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew. They had learned to read each other's silences as clearly as their words. "Everything," she replied honestly. "Our wedding day, when you were so nervous you nearly dropped the ring. The day George was born and you cried more than I did. Teaching Charlotte to ride her bike and how proud you were when she finally managed it on her own. Louis taking his first steps during that video call with your grandmother. All of it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the gardeners tend to the roses in the distance. The staff moved quietly and respectfully, understanding without being told that this was a private moment. Over the years, the people who worked closely with them had become like extended family, sharing in their joys and supporting them through difficulties with unwavering loyalty. Catherine thought about the letters she had been writing, one for each of her children to open on important milestones in their lives. Their 18th birthdays, their wedding days, the birth of their own children. She wanted to be there for all of those moments, to offer guidance and love even when she couldn't be physically present. The writing was exhausting emotionally, but it felt important, necessary. "I want to talk to them this weekend," she said finally. "Not about everything, but I want them to know how proud I am of them. How much joy they've brought to our lives. I want them to understand that love doesn't end. It just changes form." William nodded, his own emotions carefully controlled but visible in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he was breathing. "They know how much you love them. But yes, let's talk to them, all together, as a family." As the afternoon sun began to shift, casting new patterns of light and shadow across the garden, they made their plans for the weekend. It would be simple but profound, ordinary but extraordinary. They would cook together, play games, tell stories, and create the kind of memories that would sustain their children through whatever lay ahead. Catherine stood slowly, William rising beside her, and together they walked back toward the castle. Their steps were measured, unhurried, as if they could make time stretch by moving slowly enough. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own joys and sorrows, but today they had this: love, family, and the quiet certainty that some bonds transcend even the most difficult circumstances. The drive to Anmer Hall felt different this time, though none of the children seemed to notice. George sat in the front passenger seat, animatedly discussing his latest football match with William, while Charlotte and Louis chattered in the back about their plans for the weekend. Catherine watched the familiar countryside roll past the windows, each landmark holding memories of family trips and quiet escapes from royal duties. Anmer Hall had always been their sanctuary, the place where they could simply be a family without the weight of protocol and public expectation. The 10-bedroom Georgian country house sat nestled among trees and fields, offering privacy and space for the children to run free. Catherine had spent countless hours here during her recovery periods, finding peace in the garden and strength in the simple routines of family life. As they pulled up the gravel drive, Louis pressed his face against the window excitedly. "Can we go to the woods right away? I want to show everyone the den I started building last time." His enthusiasm was infectious, and even Catherine felt her spirits lift at his excitement. "After we unpack and have some lunch," William replied, catching Catherine's eye in the rearview mirror. They had agreed to let this weekend unfold naturally, without forcing conversations or creating artificial moments. The children needed normalcy, and they would follow their lead. The house welcomed them with its familiar warmth. Catherine had always loved the comfortable furnishings, chosen for durability and comfort rather than grandeur. This was a place where the children could put their feet up on the furniture, where muddy shoes by the door were expected rather than frowned upon, where the kitchen was the heart of the home, rather than a place where meals appeared as if by magic. While William and the children brought in their bags, Catherine stood in the hallway, breathing in the scent of home. The walls were lined with family photographs, casual snapshots rather than formal portraits. There was George's first day of school, beaming gap-toothed smile and oversized uniform. Charlotte covered in paint after an enthusiastic art session. Louis learning to walk in this very hallway, arms outstretched toward his father. "Mummy, are you coming?" Charlotte appeared at her side, slipping a small hand into hers. "I want to show you the pictures I drew for my room here." Catherine allowed herself to be led upstairs to Charlotte's bedroom, where her daughter had created a gallery of artwork on one wall. The drawings showed their family in various scenarios: picnics in the garden, trips to the beach, bedtime stories with everyone piled into one bed. In each picture, they were all smiling, stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "This one is my favorite," Charlotte said, pointing to a drawing of them all in the kitchen. "Remember when we made that cake for Daddy's birthday and Louis got more frosting on himself than on the cake?" She giggled at the memory, and Catherine felt her heart both break and heal at the same time. "I remember," Catherine said softly. "You were so determined to make it perfect, and Louis was your very enthusiastic helper." She studied the drawing more closely, noting how Charlotte had drawn her parents slightly taller, as if protecting the children beneath them. Even in her child's art, there was an intuitive understanding of the family structure, the way love created shelter. Lunch was a lively affair, with George regaling them with stories from school, and Charlotte describing her latest obsession with marine biology. "Did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts?" she announced importantly. and they're super intelligent. I think I might want to study them when I grow up." "That sounds wonderful," Catherine replied, genuinely interested. She had always encouraged the children's curiosity, their natural desire to explore and learn. "Maybe we could visit an aquarium soon and you could see some octopuses up close." Louis, not to be outdone by his siblings' conversations, began an elaborate story about the adventures he planned for his fort building. "It's going to have secret tunnels and a drawbridge and maybe even a moat if we can figure out how to make one that doesn't flood the whole house." William laughed, reaching over to ruffle Louis's hair. "I think we can work on the architecture without the moat, but secret tunnels sound very doable." After lunch, they all ventured outside. The afternoon was crisp but sunny, perfect for the outdoor adventures Louis had been planning. Catherine wrapped herself in a warm coat and followed the family toward the woods behind the house, where a small stream ran between the trees and fallen logs created natural obstacle courses for imaginative children. George and William worked together to improve Louis's den, adding sturdy branches and creating a roof that would actually keep out rain. Charlotte set up her easel nearby, attempting to capture the light filtering through the trees. Catherine found a comfortable spot on a tree stump, where she could watch them all, committing every detail to memory. "Mommy, you're my model," Charlotte announced, pointing her paintbrush in Catherine's direction. "Sit very still and look thoughtful." Catherine obliged, though she was already looking thoughtful. She watched William patiently explain to Louis how to tie knots that would hold, his large hands covering their youngest son's small ones as they worked together. She observed George's careful concentration as he selected the best branches for the construction, his natural leadership already evident in the way he organized the project. "Charlotte, darling, what are you painting exactly?" Catherine asked, curious about her daughter's artistic interpretation of the moment. "It's called Family in the Woods," Charlotte replied seriously. "I'm painting the feeling, not just what I see. Mrs. Patterson at school says that's what real artists do." The feeling. Catherine understood exactly what Charlotte meant. There was something magical about this afternoon, this simple time together that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. The sound of Louis's laughter as he discovered a particularly good hiding spot in the den. William's patient voice explaining the physics of fort construction. George's quiet pride in his engineering contributions. Charlotte's artistic concentration and her unconscious humming as she painted. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting golden light through the trees, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was what she had always wanted for her children, the freedom to be themselves, to explore and create and simply be children. Despite the unique circumstances of their lives, despite the challenges they faced as a family, they had managed to create these pockets of pure joy. "I think it's time for hot chocolate," she announced, noting that Louis was beginning to shiver slightly despite his enthusiastic denial that he was cold. The trek back to the house was filled with chatter about the day's accomplishments and plans for the evening. George suggested a movie night. Charlotte wanted to finish her painting by the fire, and Louis was already planning improvements to the fort for their next visit. As they reached the house, Catherine paused to look back at the woods, now darkening as evening approached. Tomorrow would bring its own activities and conversations, its own opportunities for connection and memory-making. But this afternoon would remain perfect in her mind, a golden moment when her family was simply and completely happy together. Evening descended over Anmer Hall like a gentle embrace, and the family gathered in the sitting room where a fire crackled warmly in the hearth. Catherine had changed into comfortable clothes, soft pajamas, and a cashmere cardigan that William had given her years ago. It still smelled faintly of her perfume and something indefinably comforting that the children associated with home and safety. George had indeed advocated for a movie night, but the conversation had evolved into something more intimate. They found themselves sharing stories instead, each family member taking turns to recount favorite memories. The formal structure dissolved naturally, and soon they were all curled up together on the large sofa. Louis nestled between his parents while George and Charlotte claimed the armrests as their personal territories. "Tell us about when you and Daddy first met," Charlotte requested, settling her paintbrush aside and giving her mother her full attention. This was one of their favorite family stories, though the children never tired of hearing different versions and discovering new details. Catherine smiled, glancing at William, who rolled his eyes in mock exasperation. "Again, haven't we told you this story 100 times?" But it's different every time, George pointed out with the logic of a child who paid attention to details. Last time Mummy said she thought Daddy was showing off when he played water polo. The time before that she said he was terrible at it. I never said he was terrible, Catherine protested, laughing. I said he was enthusiastic. There's a difference. She reached over to touch William's arm. Your father was many things at university, but subtle was not one of them. William feigned offense. I was charming and sophisticated. Your mother just didn't appreciate my natural athletic grace. Natural athletic grace? Catherine raised an eyebrow. You once walked into a glass door because you were trying to impress me with your casual confidence. The children erupted in giggles, and Louis bounced excitedly. Tell us about the glass door. You never told us about the glass door. Catherine and William exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that had developed over nearly 2 decades together. They both understood that these stories, these shared memories, would become even more precious to the children in the future. Each detail they shared now would be treasured and retold. Well, Catherine began, settling more comfortably into the sofa. It was during our second year at university. Your father had decided that he was going to ask me to the spring ball, but he was being very mysterious about it. He kept appearing wherever I happened to be, trying to look casual but really just lurking around corners. I was not lurking, William interjected. I was strategically positioning myself for optimal conversation opportunities. Is that what you called it? Catherine's eyes twinkled with mischief. Because what it looked like was a very tall young man hiding behind inadequately sized trees and pretending to read the same book upside down for 3 days running. George shook his head in disbelief. Daddy, you read a book upside down? For 3 days? It was a very interesting book, William replied with dignity. I was exploring alternative perspectives on literature. Charlotte, ever practical, cut to the heart of the matter. But what about the glass door? Catherine continued the story, her voice taking on the cadence of a well-loved fairy tale. Your father had finally worked up the courage to approach me directly. I was leaving the library, and he came striding over with what he later told me was his most confident walk. He was looking at me instead of where he was going, and... She paused for dramatic effect. And, Louis prompted, though he had heard this story before and knew exactly what was coming. And he walked straight into the glass door at full speed, made the most enormous noise. Everyone in the library looked up to see this very red-faced young man apologizing profusely to a door. The children dissolved into laughter again, and even William couldn't suppress a smile at the memory. In my defense, that door was extremely clean. It was practically invisible. What did you do, Mummy? Charlotte asked, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Well, I couldn't very well pretend I hadn't seen it happen, so I walked over, checked that he wasn't seriously hurt, and asked if he'd been trying to ask me something before he got distracted by his battle with the architecture. And then Daddy asked you to the ball? George asked, though he knew the answer. Actually, William said, taking over the story, I was so embarrassed that I asked if she wanted to get coffee sometime. Much less impressive than a ball, but I figured I should probably start smaller and work my way up to events that required formal wear. And I said yes, Catherine finished softly. Because anyone who could laugh at himself after walking into a glass door was probably someone worth knowing better. Louis had been listening intently, and now he looked up at his parents with the serious expression he wore when processing important information. Is that when you fell in love? At the coffee? Catherine and William looked at each other again, and this time the communication was deeper, more complex. How do you explain to children the gradual awakening of love? The way it creeps up on you disguised as friendship and compatibility and shared laughter. Love isn't usually like lightning, Catherine said carefully. It's more like sunrise. You don't always notice it happening, but one day you realize that everything is brighter and warmer than it was before. For me, William added, it was watching your mother help a friend study for an exam she was struggling with. Mummy spent hours explaining concepts and making flashcards, never once acting like it was a bother. I realized that she was the kindest person I'd ever met, and that I wanted to spend my life learning how to be that kind to other people. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. Like how you always help us with our homework even when you're tired. Exactly like that, Catherine confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of Charlotte's head. Love is wanting to help someone be their best self, and having them want the same thing for you. The fire popped softly in the fireplace, And for a moment they all sat in comfortable silence, digesting not just the story but the deeper truths embedded within it. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, creating a gentle soundtrack to their evening together. George, who had been quietly thoughtful, suddenly spoke up. "Are you and Daddy still falling in love? Like, is the sunrise still happening?" The question caught Catherine off guard with its perceptiveness. At 13, George was beginning to understand relationships in more nuanced ways, to see beyond the simple fairy tale endings to the daily work of loving someone. "Yes," she said simply. "Every day I discover something new to love about your father. The way he makes silly voices when he reads to Louis. How patient he is when Charlotte wants to explain her latest scientific discovery. The way he still brings me tea exactly the way I like it, even after all these years. And I fall in love with your mother again every time I watch her with you three," William added. "The way she listens to your stories, how she remembers every detail about your friends and your worries and your dreams. She loves you so completely that it makes my heart too big for my chest." Louis yawned hugely, finally succumbing to the warmth and comfort of the evening. "I love you too," he mumbled sleepily. "All of you, even when George steals my biscuits and Charlotte corrects my drawings." "Even then," Catherine agreed softly, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Love means especially then." Sunday morning arrived with the soft light that only seems to exist in the English countryside. Catherine woke before the others, as had become her habit in recent months. Sleep had become more elusive, but rather than fighting it, she had learned to treasure these quiet moments when the house held nothing but peace and possibility. She made her way downstairs carefully, not wanting to wake the family. The kitchen welcomed her with its familiar warmth, and she set about making tea and preparing breakfast. These simple domestic tasks had taken on new meaning lately. Each ordinary moment felt like a gift, each routine action a meditation on the life she had built here. William found her there 20 minutes later, wearing the old dressing gown she had bought him for his birthday years ago. It was faded and soft now, but he refused to replace it. Claiming it was perfectly broken in, he moved to her side without speaking, understanding that these morning moments were precious to her. "The children are still sleeping," he said quietly, accepting the cup of tea she offered him. "Louis somehow ended up in our bed at some point in the night. I didn't have the heart to move him," Catherine smiled. "He's been doing that more often lately. I think he senses things, even if he doesn't understand them completely." Children had an intuitive wisdom about family dynamics, often knowing when extra comfort was needed before the adults realized it themselves. They stood together at the kitchen window, watching the sun gradually illuminate the gardens they had planned and planted together over the years. The rose bushes were dormant now, but Catherine could envision them in full bloom, the way they would look in a few months when spring returned. She wondered if she would see them flower again, then gently pushed the thought away. Today was for living, not for wondering about tomorrows that might not come. "I want to cook for them today," she said suddenly. "Really cook. Sunday roast, Yorkshire pudding, the works. I want them to remember the smell of home." William nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. "What can I do to help?" "Just be here," she replied simply. "Be yourself. Make terrible jokes, steal bites of everything while I'm cooking. Be the father and husband you've always been." The sound of feet on the stairs announced the arrival of their children. Charlotte appeared first, her hair sticking up at impossible angles, followed by George, who was already dressed and ready for the day. Louis brought up the rear, dragging his favorite stuffed elephant and looking thoroughly rumpled from his migration between beds during the night. "Something smells good," George announced, heading straight for the refrigerator in the way of teenage boys everywhere. "Mummy's making proper breakfast," William explained, lifting Louis onto his shoulders in one smooth motion that made their youngest giggle with delight. "And later we're going to cook Sunday lunch together. Can I help with the Yorkshire pudding?" Charlotte asked eagerly. She had been fascinated by the alchemy of cooking lately, the way simple ingredients could transform into something completely different through the application of heat and technique. "Of course," Catherine replied. "You can be my sous chef. But first, breakfast." The morning unfolded with the gentle rhythm of family life. They ate pancakes with golden syrup, discussed plans for the day, and engaged in the comfortable banter that characterizes families who genuinely enjoy each other's company. George regaled them with stories about his friends at school. Charlotte shared her latest theories about marine biology, and Louis performed an elaborate puppet show using his stuffed elephant and a napkin. After breakfast, they prepared for their traditional Sunday walk around the grounds. Catherine bundled up warmly, accepting William's steadying hand as they made their way outside. The children ran ahead, their energy boundless even in the crisp air, while their parents followed at a more measured pace. "Do you remember when we first brought George here?" Catherine asked as they walked along the path that circled the property. He was so small and so fascinated by everything. He kept asking if the sheep belonged to us, and you told him that we were borrowing them from the farmer next door, William recalled. He was very concerned about returning them in good condition. They paused to watch their children exploring a copse of trees, Charlotte attempting to identify different species while George and Louis engaged in an elaborate game that seemed to involve a great deal of running and shouting. The sound of their laughter carried on the cool air, and Catherine felt her heart both full and breaking at the beauty of the moment. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, her words visible as small puffs of vapor in the cold air. "I've been writing letters. For the children. For their futures." William was quiet for a long moment, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly around hers. "What kind of letters?" "The important moments. Birthdays, graduations, weddings. Times when they might need to hear my voice, might need to know what I would have said." She paused, watching Louis attempt to climb a tree that was clearly too big for him. "I want them to know that I'll always be proud of them, no matter what paths they choose." "Catherine," William's voice was rough with emotion, "I need you to know that it's okay," she continued, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was saying. "When the time comes, it's okay to let me go. The children need to see that grief is part of love, but so is healing, so is moving forward." They stood together in the cold morning air, and Catherine could feel William struggling with the enormity of what she was asking. She understood his resistance. How do you prepare to say goodbye to the person who has been your partner in everything for so many years? "I can't imagine," he started, then stopped. "I know," she said gently. "I can't imagine it either, but I can imagine you being strong for them. I can imagine you helping them remember the good times. I can imagine you teaching them that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes shape." Charlotte came running over, interrupting their conversation with breathless excitement. "Mummy, Daddy, come see what we found. There's a bird's nest in the oak tree, and I think there might be eggs in it." Catherine and William exchanged a look, the heavy conversation temporarily suspended but not forgotten. They allowed themselves to be led toward the discovery, Catherine marveling at how life continued to offer small wonders even in the midst of larger sorrows. The bird's nest was indeed impressive, woven intricately among the branches and clearly the work of skilled architects. Though it was too high to see inside, Charlotte was convinced that it contained the promise of new life, eggs that would hatch into baby birds when spring arrived. "It's amazing how they know exactly what to do," Charlotte observed, craning her neck to get a better view. "How do they know how to build something so perfect without anyone teaching them?" "Instinct," Catherine replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most important things we know aren't learned. They're just part of who we are." As they made their way back to the house for lunch preparations, Catherine reflected on her daughter's observation. Perhaps Charlotte was right about instinct, about the knowledge that comes from somewhere deeper than teaching. Perhaps her children already knew, on some fundamental level, how to love and be loved, how to carry someone with them even when that person could no longer be physically present. The kitchen beckoned, warm and welcoming, ready for the afternoon of cooking together that would create both a meal and memories to last a lifetime. The kitchen at Anmer Hall transformed into something magical that Sunday afternoon. What had started as a simple plan to cook lunch together evolved into an elaborate family production, with each member taking on roles that suited their personalities and abilities. Catherine found herself at the center of it all, orchestrating the chaos with the patience and humor that had made her such a beloved mother. Charlotte had appointed herself head of Yorkshire pudding operations, studying the recipe with the intensity of a scientist conducting crucial research. She measured ingredients with precise care, explaining to anyone who would listen the chemical reactions that would transform batter into the golden, puffy accompaniment their Sunday roast deserved. "The secret is getting the oil really hot first," she announced importantly, having absorbed this wisdom from previous cooking sessions with her grandmother Carol. "And you can't open the oven door once they start rising, or they'll collapse like deflated balloons." George had taken charge of peeling vegetables. working methodically through a pile of potatoes while engaging in an ongoing debate with his father about football statistics. His knife skills had improved dramatically over the past year, and Catherine felt a pang of pride watching him work with such confidence and care. Louis, too young for sharp implements but too enthusiastic to be excluded, had been assigned the crucial task of setting the table. He approached this responsibility with the seriousness of a royal protocol officer, carefully placing each piece of cutlery and adjusting the positioning with an artist's eye for symmetry. William moved between tasks, helping wherever needed and maintaining a running commentary that kept everyone laughing. He told stories about his own early cooking disasters, including the time he had attempted to surprise Catherine with dinner and nearly set their first apartment on fire, trying to flambe something that was definitely not meant to be flambéed. The fire department was very understanding, he assured the children, who were hanging on every word of his culinary confessions. But your mother made me promise to stick to simpler recipes after that. I was banned from anything involving open flames for at least 6 months. What about the barbecue last summer? George pointed out with the logic of someone who paid attention to details. You used open flames then? That was different, William replied with mock dignity. Outdoor cooking is completely different from indoor cooking. Different rules entirely, Catherine laughed, remembering that particular barbecue disaster, when William had been so distracted by a game of football with the children that he had completely forgotten about the sausages until they were charcoal. Your father has very creative definitions of cooked properly, she told the children. Sometimes his idea of well done extends into the realm of archaeology. The afternoon continued with this gentle teasing and shared laughter, the kind of family interaction that seems ordinary while it's happening, but becomes precious in memory. Catherine moved between her children, helping Charlotte with her Yorkshire pudding technique, praising George's vegetable preparation skills, and admiring Louis's increasingly elaborate table-setting vision. As the roast cooked, filling the kitchen with the warm, comforting smells of home, Catherine found herself paying attention to details she might normally take for granted. The way Charlotte unconsciously hummed while she worked, a habit she had inherited from her mother. George's growing confidence in the kitchen, the careful way he handled knives, and his genuine interest in learning proper techniques. Louis's chatter, which provided a constant soundtrack of observations and questions and stories that jumped from topic to topic with the fluid logic of childhood. Mummy, Louis said suddenly, looking up from his table-setting masterpiece, why do we have special plates for Sunday lunch? It was a simple question, but it opened up a conversation about traditions and the ways families mark important moments. Catherine explained how using their best china wasn't about the food being fancier, but about recognizing that shared meals were celebrations worth honoring. Every time we sit down together like this, we're saying that this moment matters, she told him, kneeling down to his level. We're saying that being together as a family is something special, something worth celebrating. Louis nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to concepts that felt important. So every Sunday lunch is like a little party? Exactly like that, Catherine confirmed, feeling her heart swell with love for this earnest little boy who wanted to understand the deeper meanings behind their family rituals. Charlotte emerged from her Yorkshire pudding, preparations with flour in her hair and a triumphant expression. They're ready to go in the oven, she announced. Mummy, will you check my batter? I want to make sure it's right. Catherine examined Charlotte's work with the attention of a master chef evaluating a student's final exam. The batter was smooth and properly mixed, seasoned correctly and at just the right consistency. This is perfect, darling. Your puddings are going to be absolutely gorgeous. As Charlotte carefully poured the batter into the preheated muffin tins, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion. This was what she had always wanted for her children. The confidence to try new things, the satisfaction of creating something with their own hands, the joy of contributing to their family's happiness. George had moved on from vegetables to helping prepare the gravy, a task that required patience and attention, but suited his methodical nature. He stirred carefully while William guided him through the process of gradually adding liquid to the pan drippings, explaining the science behind creating the perfect consistency. It's like chemistry, George observed, watching the mixture thicken. You have to get the proportions exactly right or it doesn't work. Very much like chemistry, Catherine agreed. Cooking is really just edible science experiments. The afternoon wore on, marked by the timer's regular announcements and the gradually building aromas that signaled their feast was nearing completion. Catherine found herself memorizing everything: the sound of her children's voices overlapping in conversation, the way William unconsciously reached out to steady Charlotte as she moved around the kitchen, the concentration on George's face as he mastered new cooking techniques, Louis's running commentary on everything happening around him. As they worked together, Catherine felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with the food they were preparing. They were creating more than a meal. They were weaving together the threads of love and tradition and shared experience that would sustain her children, long after this particular Sunday had become a memory. When the timer finally announced that everything was ready, they gathered around the table Louis had set with such care. The meal was perfect, but more importantly, the moment was perfect. Catherine looked around the table at her family, at the faces she loved more than anything in the world, and felt a peace that transcended the circumstances they were facing. This was love made tangible, the shared labor of creating something together, the pride in contributing to the family's happiness, the joy of sitting down to enjoy the fruits of their collaborative effort. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. A Sunday lunch that would be remembered not for the food, but for the love that had seasoned every moment of its preparation. As evening approached at Anmer Hall, Catherine felt the weight of unspoken words growing heavier in her chest. The perfect day they had shared as a family had created the right atmosphere, but she knew that the conversation she had been planning could not be delayed much longer. After dinner, while the children played a board game in the sitting room, she caught William's eye and nodded toward the kitchen. They stood together at the sink, ostensibly cleaning dishes but really gathering courage for what came next. The sounds of laughter from the other room provided a bittersweet soundtrack to their whispered conversation about timing and approach. How do you tell children that their world is about to change forever? How do you prepare them for goodbye without stealing their remaining time together? I think we should talk to them tonight, Catherine said softly, her hand stilling on the plate she was drying. They deserve to know what's happening. They're already sensing that something is different. William nodded, though she could see the reluctance in his shoulders, the way he was holding himself too carefully. What do we tell them exactly? How much detail? The truth, but gently, Catherine replied. They need to know that I'm getting sicker and that the doctors can't fix it this time. They need to know that we'll have time together, but not as much as we had hoped. They returned to the sitting room where their children were engaged in an animated game of Monopoly that had clearly been going on for some time. George was winning as usual, while Charlotte had developed an elaborate system for organizing her money by denomination. Louis was more interested in moving the playing pieces around the board than in following the actual rules of the game. Can we pause the game for a bit? Catherine asked, settling into her favorite chair. Daddy and I would like to talk with you all about something important. The children looked up with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. George, always the most perceptive, seemed to understand immediately that this was a serious conversation. Charlotte carefully set aside the dice she had been holding, while Louis abandoned his manipulation of the game pieces to give his parents his full attention. Is everything okay? Charlotte asked, her young face already showing the worry that came from being old enough to sense adult concerns but not old enough to understand them fully. Catherine took a deep breath, drawing on reserves of strength she had been building for weeks. You know that I've been sick and that I've been having treatments to try to get better. The children nodded solemnly. They had been remarkably adaptable to the changes in routine, the medical appointments, the days when she was too tired for normal activities. The thing is, she continued carefully, sometimes medicine can't fix everything, no matter how hard the doctors try or how much we want it to work. She paused, watching their faces, calibrating her words to their ages and understanding. George's expression grew very serious. At 13, he was beginning to grasp concepts that his younger siblings couldn't fully comprehend yet. Are you saying you're not going to get better, Mummy? I'm saying that we need to prepare for the possibility that I might not get better, Catherine replied honestly. The doctors are still trying to help me feel as good as possible for as long as possible, but I want you to know what's happening so that we can make the most of our time together. Louis, who had been listening with the intense concentration he brought to things he didn't quite understand, raised his hand as if he were in school. Does that mean you're going to die? The directness of the question, delivered in Louis's matter-of-fact 5-year-old voice, hit Catherine like a physical blow. But she had prepared for this moment, had practiced finding words that would be honest without being terrifying. It might mean that, "Sweetheart," she said gently, opening her arms so that Louis could climb into her lap. "But it doesn't mean that right now. Right now, it means that we're going to spend lots of time together doing things we love. It means that every day we have is special and important." Charlotte, ever practical, had questions about logistics. What would happen to us? Where would we live? "You would stay right here with Daddy," Catherine assured her quickly. "Nothing about your daily life would change. You'd still go to the same schools, still see the same friends, still live in the same houses. Daddy would take care of you and you'd take care of each other just like you do now." William had been quiet during this exchange, letting Catherine lead the conversation but ready to step in when needed. Now he moved closer to the group, his presence solid and reassuring. "And you'd have lots of other people who love you too. Grandmama and Grandpapa, Granny Carol and Grandpa Michael, all your aunts and uncles. You'd never be alone." George had been processing the information with the methodical approach he brought to complex problems. "How long do we have? I mean, how much time?" It was the question Catherine had been dreading because she didn't have a clear answer. The doctors had given estimates, ranges of possibilities, but no definitive timeline. "We don't know exactly," she admitted. "Maybe months, maybe longer. The important thing isn't how much time we have, but what we do with it." "What we do with it?" Charlotte echoed, seeking clarification. "We love each other," Catherine said simply. "We spend time together. We talk about things that matter. We make memories. We say the things that are important to say." Louis had been unusually quiet, nestled against his mother's chest, and now he looked up at her with the serious expression he wore when grappling with big concepts. "Will you still be my mummy even if you die?" The question broke Catherine's heart and healed it simultaneously. "I will always be your mummy," she promised, kissing the top of his head. "Death doesn't change love. I will love you forever and always, no matter what happens." "Like how we still love Great Granny even though she died before I was born?" Charlotte asked, making connections with the family stories they had shared over the years. "Exactly like that," Catherine confirmed. "Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes from the kind of love where you can hug someone and talk to them every day, to the kind of love that lives in your heart and your memories." George had been quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with emotions too big for his teenage ability to process. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Is there anything we can do? Any treatments that might work?" Catherine appreciated his practical approach, his desire to problem solve and take action. "The doctors are still trying some things and I'm doing everything I can to stay healthy and strong. But sometimes the most important thing we can do is accept what we can't change and focus on what we can control." "What can we control?" Charlotte asked. "How we treat each other, how we spend our time. What we choose to focus on," Catherine replied. "We can choose to be sad about what we might lose, or we can choose to be grateful for what we have right now." The room fell into a thoughtful silence as the children absorbed this new reality. Catherine could see each of them processing the information in their own way, forming questions and concerns that would surface in the days and weeks to come. This wouldn't be the only conversation they would have about her illness, but it was the foundation upon which all future discussions would build. "Can we still do normal things?" Louis asked suddenly. "Like play games and go on trips and have birthday parties?" "Of course we can," Catherine assured him. "We're going to do all the normal things, and we're going to do some special things too. We're going to make sure that every day counts." As the evening wore on, the conversation gradually shifted from the serious topics to practical questions and immediate concerns. The children wanted to know if they could tell their friends, whether their daily routines would change, and what would happen to family traditions and holidays. Catherine answered each question with patience and honesty, helping them understand that while their future was changing, their foundation of love and security remained solid. As bedtime approached, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The hardest conversation was behind them, and now they could move forward together with honesty and openness rather than hidden fears and unspoken worries. 3 months later, the morning arrived that they had all been dreading yet somehow preparing for. Catherine had spent her final weeks surrounded by the quiet grace that had characterized her entire approach to this journey. The children had adapted with the remarkable resilience of young hearts, learning to treasure small moments and express love freely, understanding that time was precious without becoming paralyzed by that knowledge. William sat beside her bed in their room at Anmer Hall, where she had chosen to spend these last days. The children had said their private goodbyes the evening before, each conversation tailored to their ages and needs. George had been brave and practical, asking about arrangements and expressing his commitment to helping take care of his younger siblings. Charlotte had shared her latest painting, a rainbow over their family home, and whispered promises to keep studying marine biology because she knew it would make her mother proud. Louis had simply curled up next to Catherine and told her all his favorite memories of their time together, his 5-year-old wisdom understanding that stories were the best gifts he could offer. Now, in the early morning quiet, Catherine and William shared their own goodbye. 20 years of marriage had prepared them for many things, but not for this. Yet even in their grief, they found grace in the love that had sustained them through everything. "The letters are in my desk," Catherine whispered, her voice weak but her eyes still bright with the intelligence and warmth that had captivated him since university. "One for each birthday, one for each graduation, one for their wedding days. And there's one for you for when you're ready." William nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. They had covered the practical matters weeks ago, but these personal details still needed to be shared. "Promise me you'll help them remember the happy times," she continued. "Not this part. The laughter, the adventures, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons when we were all just being a family. I promise," he managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what she was asking. Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her tired face into something luminous. "And promise me you'll let yourself be happy again someday. The children need to see that love doesn't end with loss, it makes space for new love alongside the old." This was perhaps the hardest promise she was asking of him, but William understood the wisdom in it. Their children needed to learn that honoring someone's memory didn't require stopping your own life, that love was abundant rather than finite. "I love you," he said simply, words that had been exchanged countless times over their years together, but had never carried more weight or meaning. "I love you too," she replied. "All of you. Forever." Catherine passed peacefully just as the sun was rising over the gardens they had planned together, with William holding her hand and the sounds of their home waking up around them. The children were still sleeping, and William was grateful for this small mercy. They would wake to a changed world, but they would wake in their own beds in their own home, surrounded by all the familiar comforts that would help them navigate the grief ahead. The days that followed were a blur of arrangements and ceremonies, but also of unexpected moments of grace. The public mourning was overwhelming in its scope and sincerity, as millions of people around the world expressed their love for Catherine and their support for the family she left behind. But it was the private moments that sustained them. The way Charlotte insisted on wearing her mother's favorite bracelet to the funeral, how George quietly took charge of making sure Louis had his stuffed elephant whenever he needed comfort, how Louis asked if his mummy could see the flowers people were leaving for her. In the weeks and months that followed, William discovered that Catherine had been preparing for this transition in ways he hadn't fully understood at the time. The letters she had written provided comfort and guidance at crucial moments. The traditions she had established gave the children continuity and connection to her memory. The love she had poured into their daily lives had created a foundation strong enough to support them through even this most difficult passage. George stepped into his role as big brother with a maturity that both broke William's heart and filled him with pride. He helped with homework, organized family game nights, and served as a bridge between his father and younger siblings when grief made communication difficult. Charlotte threw herself into her art and her studies, finding in creativity and learning the healing that her mother had always encouraged her to seek. Louis, with the adaptability of childhood, learned to carry his mother's memory like a warm secret, talking to her in moments when he needed extra comfort, and gradually, understanding that love truly didn't end with death. William himself navigated the impossible task of being both father and mother to his children while processing his own profound loss. There were difficult days when the weight of single parenthood felt overwhelming, when he questioned every decision and wondered if he was doing enough. But there were also moments of unexpected joy. Charlotte's excitement when she won a science fair, George's pride in making the school football team, Lewis's delight in learning to ride a bike without training wheels. Slowly, carefully, they learned to build a new kind of normal. Family dinners still happened around the same table, but now they often included stories about Catherine, sharing memories and keeping her presence alive in their daily lives. Bedtime stories continued, though William had to develop his own repertoire of voices and characters. Holiday traditions were maintained but adapted, honoring the past while acknowledging their changed circumstances. A year later, as they gathered for their first Christmas at Anmer Hall without Catherine, William watched his children decorating the tree with ornaments she had collected over the years. Each decoration told a story, carried a memory, connected them to the woman who had made their house a home. They were different now, all of them, shaped by loss but not broken by it. They had learned that love was stronger than death, that memories could be both painful and comforting, that healing didn't mean forgetting. Louis hung the angel on the top of the tree, carefully placing it in the position his mother had always favored. "Do you think Mummy can see how beautiful it looks?" he asked, his question carrying both sadness and hope. "I think she can see how beautiful you all are," William replied, gathering his children close. "And I think she's proud of how brave and kind and loving you've all been." As they stood together in the warm glow of the Christmas tree, surrounded by the decorations and traditions Catherine had created for them, William felt her presence in the love that connected them all. She was gone, but she was also still there in every act of kindness, every moment of laughter, every expression of love they shared. Her goodbye had been quiet, but her legacy would last forever in the hearts and lives of the family she had loved so completely. The tears that fell that Christmas night were not only tears of sadness for what they had lost, but tears of gratitude for what they had been given. 20 years of love, 3 beautiful children, and memories that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Catherine's final gift to her family had been the courage to face loss with grace, and the wisdom to understand that love endures beyond any goodbye.